Virtual Research Forum. So welcome to everybody and thank you very much for joining. We'd really appreciate sort of any feedback on this forum, both in terms of the content and how it's running, but I guess that the newest bit is about it running virtually. So any feedback, any thoughts, suggestions on how we can change this, what's worked, what hasn't worked would be great. We've got we've just had one of our new committee members pop up on the screen. So Stephen's here, so we'll just say a quick hello and welcome to Stephen. We're really pleased to have him joining the committee. We've got Laurie on, who's a committee member with us as well, and Annie, you can see in the bottom screen, is going to be our second speaker of the session. If you have any questions, if you want to put them in the chat, I'll try and keep an eye on the chat, or if it's something that you want to kind of chat through a little bit more, then pop your hand up and we'll try and find a time to kind of switch over to you. But otherwise, if you can just keep your mic muted, that would be really helpful just to kind of help improve the audio for the person that's presenting. So first up, we have Laurie Cave. So she's one of our children's dietitians who is currently undertaking an NIHR PhD. And yeah, she's going to have a chat to us about conducting research virtually. Brilliant. So I'm going to do my best to share my screen. This should hopefully. So, can you guys see that okay?
Yes, we can see like PowerPoint, but it is a black. Oh no, now it's working. Yeah, I can see it.
Working okay. So give me a shout if anything goes wrong, but otherwise I will just read through the slides as and when Laurie's ready for it.
Okay, so can you hear me? testing and all of that.
Yeah.
So
yeah, we can hear you.
If you can't, just shout or do a little wave or something to me. That would be lovely. Is there any way to put that on as a slideshow then, or is it?
Yeah, I think I just need to unshare my screen. Sorry, I need to just work out how I do this. Right, bear with me. I think I need to come off the share and then start the slideshow. Sorry. Yes, hopefully it will work. Yeah, that should be better. Right. In fact, I don't think I can, Marie, because as soon as I go onto the slideshow, I then can't get back to the Children's Research Forum. So I think we might have to make do with the screen. Yeah. Right, let me go back to it. Okay. Yeah.
I think what you might be able to do, Lynn, is share it, and then you won't see the Teams meeting, but I think we'll probably still be able to see it. Okay. So from there, if you just click from beginning, maybe give that a go, okay. And we'll let you know.
Oh, thank you, Angela. Superstars. Team effort. Thank you.
Hopefully.
Okay. I'm not. It hasn't changed on my screen, but should we get going anyway?
No, it's not changed on my screen. Had you tried clicking the slideshow, Lynn?
It's changed the slide screen on the slideshow on mine, and it is flicking through it on mine. Anyone else?
Just have to stick with it as it is, I think.
There's
but
no
you
problem.
Can see you can see it okay for now. Yeah. Okay.
Good. Brilliant. Okay. So I'll talk to you really just really introduce really methods around conducting research remotely and share some top tips as well. So I'm no expert on this at all. I'm learning as I'm going, and I'm sure there'll be lots of other things that people can input, so that'll be fantastic. But this will just sort of get us going at least. So yeah, I'm usually a specialist children's dietitian, but I'm currently doing a PhD at the University of Leeds. So can I go on to the next one then, Lynn? Or?
Did that work? If that works, okay, can you see the second slide?
No.
Sorry, I think you'll probably have to come out of the share, out of the slideshow and go back to just having it on your screen if that's not worked.
Sorry, guys.
This is all
Yeah, I think
learning
it's like
today.
funny, like share your desktop, but then don't click like to start the presentation. Just scroll through it.
Yeah. Okay.
I managed to get about 10 minutes into a presentation before someone said that the slides weren't working. So
Yeah,
definitely good to hear
I'm
about
really
it
sorry,
at the
guys.
start.
It's just, it is just free. It's now not showing anything just there. I'm really sorry for the technical issues. Bear with me. No, it's saying there's no file. Oh, there it is. Got it.
Laurie, do you want to just tell us a bit about your?
Yeah.
Oh, no.
Oh, sorry,
Can
yeah.
you see it
I was
now?
gonna say, that's perfect now, yeah.
Yeah, looks
Brilliant.
good.
Okay, so
Thank
just
you.
some general points really then. I think if, just to get us going, so if we're conducting research remotely, then we're really thinking about adopting or adapting methods, rather than using completely kind of new methods. But it does require us to think differently. So as well as choosing methods that would to meet our research aims, we need to consider things such as, which methods are going to be inclusive if we're online, which techniques may engage participants and then maintain their engagement. And in terms of ethical issues, I think you really can't start thinking about this early enough. So much to consider really. Principally, I guess, in these sort of unprecedented times, whether the research kind of needs to be carried out right now. So we're starting to think about the environment and the context that your potential participants are in. So normal routines are disrupted. People may be feeling really uncertain and worried, may be ill, or may have caring responsibilities. So is the research really creating an additional burden on them? On the other hand, some potential participants may welcome the distraction of a research project. So just other things such as, if research is happening in a shared space at home, then really needing to consider potential risks to confidentiality. And things around how you're going to gain consent. So I've put a few ideas on there. So something like consent kit, or using a simple survey tool. Obviously, you can audio record the verbal consent. So for example, at the start of an interview, or you could get consent through email. Some of the advantages of doing research remotely is that it really does it does enable inclusion of participants that are really quite geographically scattered. So that might be a real plus. It might mean that more participants can be involved than if it was face-to-face. And you are saving time and travel costs. So, it's obviously a bit more environmentally friendly altogether. Some of the disadvantages would be that you can miss out on quite important contextual and non-verbal information potentially. And some participants may be digitally excluded, so they might not have access to or feel confident using technology, or maybe not be supported to be able to do so, or they might have poor Wi-Fi connection, or that sort of thing. So for some participants, communicating over the telephone or via video might be quite tricky. So for example, if they're deaf or have a hearing impairment or a speech impairment. So there are various things definitely to consider. Okay, can we try the next slide, Lynn? Thank you, fantastic. So really for this presentation, I'm just going to really look at conducting research remotely, either through generating data at the source, so primary data collection, or whether you're gathering data that already exists, so what we say secondary data collection. So one of the most common methods for generating data would be interviews. So we could conduct those by telephone. So in fact, your participant may only have access to a mobile or a landline. You could conduct the interview via email. So if you're choosing to do this, this kind of mirrors almost like a sequence of written letters where the interviewer and the interviewee have time to consider the questions and the responses, and it does eliminate the need for transcription. So that, if that's appropriate, that could be good. Then there's online, which probably is the closest substitute really for in-person interviewing, but really important to choose a secure platform that really does what you need. So Anna's going to come on in the next presentation and present around online focus groups if you're doing group interviews. But I just wanted to draw your attention to the huge number of tools that are available, so remote research tools. So I'm trying to give a bit of a list there. So depending on the sorts of tool that you want. So, so for example, if you're wanting an interactive whiteboard, so really something like Padlet might be good for gathering questions. If you're doing some analysis, Jamboard might be good, quite easy to use. There are card-based tools, so these might be really useful for sort of sketching out participants' experience. So something like Mural would be good for mapping experiences, or for capturing and sharing ideas as a mind map or a concept map. You could use something like Mind Map, which I don't think I've even put on there. But these are some of the tools that again use quite regularly now. Even things like for evaluation. So if you're coming to evaluate your data and you're having to do that as a team remotely, then if it's a qualitative analysis, something like Quirkos, or if it's again team analysis that could involve qualitative, quantitative, or mixed methods analysis, then Deduce might be good. So these are all potential tools. So I think most of it is a case of trying things out and seeing kind of what works for you, what works for your participants in a given situation. Okay, Lynn, if I can have the next one. Thank you. So another common method of data collection for generating data would be surveys. And so I just wanted to, let's not forget about good old POST. It's old-fashioned, but for inclusion purposes, it might be a really good option. And you could always consider setting up a free POST license, so you're really only paying then postage for those participants that respond. Otherwise, we could do online surveys. So again, Anna's going to present on online surveys, but really just to say that you really can collect data from a large number of people in a relatively short space of time. And whilst you would generate less rich data than interviews, participants can still give their responses to open-ended questions, so you can still generate, those unanticipated findings. Just given a few examples of tools there that are commonly used. So just to check, again, it's kind of what works for you, but some are GDPR compliant. I'm not sure what Qualtrics is. And then some require a paid license. So some are free, some require a license, but then you've got it for quite a long time. So anyway, various ones to look at there. And then the next slide, Lynn, if that's okay. I feel like I'm on countdown. The next left, or the next number, whatever. Anyway, okay. So moving on to gathering existing data now, just briefly. So if there's existing data out there, this could be a really good option because it's quite cost efficient. You're kind of making use of data that's already been collected. It's good if you don't have time and funding to conduct a study, but maybe you want to test out some ideas. And you could cross-link information from different data sources, identify where the gaps are, and really assess the quality of the data that's already available. Just to say that data might be missing in terms of answering the research question that you're particularly interested in. Because it's already generated that data, it's already been collected to answer a specific research question. It might be that some important variables may have been taken out to protect the identities of participants, particularly if there's archived data. Units of measurement may be different, that kind of thing. So there's quite a few caveats to this, but it's definitely a potential way of doing your research remotely. So just to say that existing data can be private or public, and there are different laws in different countries about what is classed as private and public. So you'd still need, and you would still need to gain consent or permission to access the data in a lot of cases. So just a tiny list there, but documents could pretty much cover anything. There's lots of social media platforms, so things like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, all these sort of things. And there's some references in the resource list, which are good if you're really wanting to get into digital methods. And then there's the products of those social media platforms, so things like discussion forums and blogs and podcasts. So again, depending on what your research question is, there might be a mine of information there. Archive data sets, so really for these, so for example, at Research Data Leeds at the University of Leeds, and there'll be archive data sets which you may be able to cross-link with other data sources to answer your research question. So just to say, with the archive data sets, then you really need quite a comprehensive understanding really of the strengths and weaknesses of the data set. So you really need to be able to carefully examine all of the accompanying documents. And for detailed descriptions of the population studied, how they were sampled, what data collection methods were used, and that sort of thing. So, but there's lots of data there that could really potentially allow you to get straight to business really without having to go from scratch. And just a note of kind of as a sort of a midway point really, is that lots of new research at the moment with COVID is being added to existing longitudinal studies. So they're kind of uniquely placed really to study the impact and the longer term consequences of COVID-19. So there's a lot more of that going on at the moment. So it's kind of adding to existing data by extending longitudinal studies even further. Okay, and then I think it's just the last slide, Lynn. So yeah, these are just some resources. So just a few there, but particularly the doing fieldwork in a pandemic, that's a really useful document if you're wanting to have a real rounded feel of what could be possible when we're in various stages of lockdown and having to work remotely. And then the two bottom references there are particularly if you're wanting to get into digital methods, particularly. So that was my round robin kind of introduction. I don't know if anyone has any questions, or we want to do questions at the end. I don't know what you were thinking, Lynn.
If anyone has questions now, we certainly have a bit of time, and I can start loading up the next presentation. Hopefully it'll be quicker this time. But yeah, has anyone got any questions for Laurie? It's really interesting hearing how it feels like everything's come on so quickly. I think the pandemic's really put a bit of a rocket under the progress with all of this stuff, hasn't it? And I mean, have you come across any challenges with gaining consent virtually? Have you had any patients or individuals that you've met for the first time, or are you mainly consenting people that you already know? And how have you found that side of things?
Yeah, I think you're kind of feeling your way through a little bit, especially if you don't know them. You're kind of reliant on maybe local contacts as well, sort of for those introductions and things. So it is very different from face to face. There's no doubt about it, but it's definitely possible. And I don't know. I think in some ways maybe it opens it up to more people. Obviously, there are more hoops to jump through and things, but those are kind of usually for good reasons. So, there's some, I think, a lot of these things have been around for a long time, but we've just had this huge acceleration in how we're adopting them now. And yeah, as to any research methods, there's sort of pluses and minuses, but I think on the whole, they're pretty good, especially for our, if you're working with children and teenagers, they seem to just take it in their stride, really. They're not phased at all, really, so on the whole. So that's been really positive. What about other people who are here? What has been your experience?
I'm just resorting to what you said about surveys, and I've got email lists for parents that I'm doing sort of a little bit of groundwork, like some trying to just collect experience data that way, just by sort of asking open-ended questions and just seeing what comes back, and doing a bit in the hospital as well, like face-to-face where possible.
It's really valuable to share these experiences going forwards, because I think we're kind of all learning from each other. So yeah, it's great to kind of connect on about this, really. If anyone else has got any other questions, or shall we move on to Anna? And we can always, have collections. Oh, Angela's got her hand up, I think. Angela.
Hi. Sorry, I'll just remember to take that down. I was just trying to find some notes. That was really, thank you, Laurie, for that. That was really useful and interesting. So thank you for sharing that. I did attend something. I'm just trying to find my notes. It quite early on in the kind of the COVID thing, which was useful around patient participation remotely. And I think something that I took away from that just to add and might be useful to others was around remuneration for patients and carers who get involved remotely. Because obviously it cuts down on a load of overheads because you don't have room hire or I suppose food and drinks and that kind of thing. But what they had suggested with regards to recruitment, it's sometimes useful to think about paying for data. I mean, I don't know how useful that might be, or how easy it might be to work that out. But they, I think from a point of view for patients being involved and mobile data, thinking about how we may remunerate patients and carers, that might be something just to consider, about offering reimbursement by way of paying towards, I don't know, something like £5 per so many gigs of data. I was just trying to find my notes. If I find it, I did make it feels like a long time ago now, but it was just quite useful. I hadn't thought of that, and I thought it'd be useful to share. That was all. So
hopefully, I don't know whether, I'm hoping that this chat facility might stay open, because I know it has with other teams. So it might be, Angela, if you do happen to find it, and maybe you can add it onto the group thread, and then or if that doesn't work, then ping it through to me, and I can always distribute that out to the group. But that would be really helpful, Angela. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, I'll do that.
Thank you. Fab. Shall we move on to you, Anna? So Anna, many of you may know Anna. Anna is a physiotherapist who is also an NIHR PhD doctoral student. So yeah, Anna, you are going to share your experiences with us, and hopefully I can share your slides a bit easier. But everybody keep their fingers crossed. Here we go. She says, there's the button on. Okay. Can you see that?
Yeah, all good. Thank you. Well, thanks, Lynn. So as Lynn mentioned, I'm Anna, and I'm carrying out my PhD at LERM at the University of Leeds, and it's looking at developing a virtual knee school, which will basically be a sort of interactive website that provides preoperative care to patients who are waiting for total knee replacement surgery. So as you'll gather, it's quite far removed from children's services, but it has involved conducting online surveys and focus groups. And a bit like Laurie, I'm very much not an expert in this area. It's been a steep learning curve, but I think a lot of the learning points are really applicable regardless of the research area. So that's what I'm going to focus on today. Thanks, Lynn. Next slide, if possible. Thank you. So I'll give a very brief overview of my project, just for a little bit of background, and then I'll focus on the two phases that involved, firstly, online surveys, and secondly, focus groups. Thanks, Lynn. So as I mentioned, the overall aim of my project is to develop this sort of preoperative care website for patients who are waiting for total knee replacement. And the key reasons for this are that knee replacements are incredibly common, but around 20% of patients aren't satisfied post-operatively. And we know that improving preoperative care is an approach that might help address this. Next slide, please, Lynn. So I'm using an approach known as an evidence theory and person-based approach to develop the website. And basically what that means is it's a mixed methods project with multiple different phases. And the ones I'm going to focus on today are phase 1B and phase 2. Which are in green on the slide, And these are both part of the sort of process of planning what goes into the website. Thanks, Lynn. So firstly, with the online modified Delphi study, the aim of this was to develop an agreed set of recommendations on preoperative total knee replacement care. And the Delphi technique is a well-established approach for developing consensus in a particular area by asking a group of experts to complete a series of surveys. And I used 3 online surveys with a total of 30 patients and 30 professionals. During the first survey, the panellists had to rate the importance of an initial set of recommendations. And then in the second and third surveys, the panellists again had to rate the importance of the recommendations. But the second and third surveys also included new recommendations from the first survey, and they included charts like the one shown on the slide, which basically summarised the panellists' responses in the preceding survey. Next slide, please, Lynn. So one of the first sort of issues that came up with planning the project was deciding what software to use. And I used a tool called Online Surveys, primarily because it's provided by the University of Leeds. So that meant it was effectively free to use, and it means it also definitely met the university data protection requirements. Online Surveys does have some limitations in terms of its functionality. So in terms of carrying out a Delphi study, it didn't allow an easy way to provide the panellists with their own sort of individual responses from the previous round. And there is more sort of specialist software called Delphi Manager that does allow you to do that. As Laurie mentioned, obtaining consent is an important consideration, and there's a useful HRA and MHA document on that. And also the University of Leeds has just brought out a new user agreement specifically for online surveys. And that states that on the first page of your survey, you need to have a link to the participant information sheet for your study and also the university data protection notice. I also felt it was really important to make maximal use of the validation options. So these are things like making certain questions required so that participants can't miss them by accident, and ideally also setting things like date limits to try and minimise the number of errors that you get in your responses. Next slide, please, Lynn. So another important consideration is deciding on how long you want your survey to be and how to structure it. And obviously you don't want the survey to be so long that nobody completes it. And actually with my second and third surveys, they were both just over 100 questions, and this triggered quite an alarming warning in online surveys, stating they strongly urged me to redesign the survey because they felt it would receive a really low response rate. It's also worth thinking that you have to actually analyse all the data you collect. And certainly I found that panellists provided a lot more free text responses than I'd been expecting, which obviously then takes more time to analyse. In terms of pilot testing, the importance of this really can't be underemphasised, because it is where you hopefully pick up any issues with your survey before you actually send it out to the participants. And obviously it's important to include a range of pilot testers, but I also found it was useful to pilot test the survey on a range of different devices and browsers. So for example, with my survey, I found that the charts looked sort of perfect in most browsers, but then with Internet Explorer, it sort of jumbled up the text in the surveys a bit and the charts a bit. So I ended up just having to advise the panellists not to use Internet Explorer when they're accessing the survey. When it comes to administering the survey, the choices for that will partly depend on what software you're using. Often there'll be an option to either administer the survey via the software or to do it manually. And I found that doing it manually worked well because it provides a sort of personal touch, which can help increase your response rates. But the sort of disadvantage of that approach was it was a much bigger time investment. And also it meant that I couldn't prevent some panellists completing the survey twice, which did actually happen on a couple of occasions. It's also worth thinking about whether you want to send any reminders, and if you do, how to administer them, when to administer them, and how many you'll include in total. And just to highlight, as Laurie mentioned, that these are all the sort of things that need to be factored into the ethics application, so planning them as early as possible is really helpful. Next slide, please, Lynn. So moving on to the online qualitative study, the aim of this phase was to explore patients' perspectives of potential barriers and facilitators to engagement with the virtual knee school. So we did this using 3 online focus groups with a total of 14 participants. Next slide, please, Lynn. So just as for the online surveys, one of the first considerations was what platform to use, again thinking about things like cost, security and functionality. And I used a tool called Blackboard Collaborate, again primarily because it was provided by the University of Leeds, so it's effectively free to use and meets their data protection requirements. It also provided all the functions I needed, and I'd say that most platforms do provide lots of functions, but it's worth really thinking about what functions you actually need to use and how you're going to use them. So for example, I found that sharing my screen worked really well because it meant I could show the participants some examples of what the website might look like. But I also tried to use the raise hand option, and this didn't really work so well initially because I found that the participants were tending to raise their hand every time they wanted to speak, and that interrupted the sort of natural interactions between participants that are an important part of focus groups. So during the second and third focus groups, I really emphasised that the raise hand option was only there if participants had something they wanted to say and they were really sort of struggling to get a chance to say it. Again, obtaining consent is an important consideration, and there are various options, as I mentioned, for doing this. You can use an e-consent form, which is what I did, and that seemed to work quite well. But if you are including people who maybe don't have internet access, then including something like a paper consent form would be important too. Next slide, please, then. So in terms of planning the sessions, I found it was really helpful to develop a clear set of joining instructions so that I could send that out to the participants in advance. And I also sent out the material that I was planning on sharing on screen, which is really helpful so that if participants couldn't join online or they dropped out, they still had access to the materials. I also found it was really helpful to set up practice sessions if participants wanted them, so that if they didn't feel confident about joining online, they could sort of run through what they needed to do without keeping other participants waiting. And I also found it was really invaluable to have the option for participants to join via mobile phone, because there were some participants who just weren't able to join online for whatever reason. Another thing to think about at quite an early stage is how you're going to do your recording and transcription. And in terms of the recording and transcription, that will depend slightly on the software that you're using. So for example, I wanted to record audio but not visual, and Blackboard doesn't allow audio recording without also recording the visual. So I used an external device. It's also worth bearing in mind that if you do use an external transcription company, they may charge more for teleconference interviews or focus groups compared to face-to-face interviews or focus groups. And pilot testing all the recording is also really helpful so that you can check it's of an appropriate quality, because again, lower quality is something that can increase the cost of your transcription. Next slide, please, then. And then when it comes to actually conducting the focus groups, an important consideration is how many facilitators will be there. So I did the focus groups just by myself, which worked okay. But if you do have an extra person, it's useful for things like sorting out joining issues and also making notes. It's useful to have backup options so that if participants don't join or drop out, you know how you're going to deal with that. And then in terms of the length of the session, as with most aspects of my research, I found it did also take longer than expected. And it was also really important to leave enough time at the end of the session to finish it well, because I found it was quite easy for the ending to feel really abrupt, because you don't get that sort of normal chit chat that you'd have at the end of a face-to-face group meeting. And then just as with the online surveys, these are all the sort of things that need to be specified in the ethics application. So it's really useful to plan them as soon as possible. Next slide, please, Lynn. So just to summarise, if you're planning on conducting online surveys or focus groups, it's worth thinking about choosing the right software and platform, bearing in mind things like cost, security and functionality. Try to make things as easy as possible for participants and yourself. For example, can you set up practice sessions for participants who are joining focus groups? Leave plenty of time for planning and pilot testing as many different aspects of the process as possible, and also have backup plans for when things maybe don't go quite as expected. Thank you for listening. I've got also a couple more slides. And then one was just to say thank you for everyone who's involved in my project and has helped so far, especially participants and my supervisors and the NIHR for funding my project. And then these are my references from the slides, and also an additional reference that's a webinar on phone and qualitative interviews. And it's quite helpful if you're wanting to find out a bit more detail about those.
Thank you, Anna. That was again really insightful, and it's great to hear kind of how you're moving forward with your research project. If we've got any sort of specific questions for Anna and Anna's kind of area of work. Yeah, go for
Sorry,
it,
it's me again. Hi, Anna. It's just thanks again. What a great talk. It's interesting, isn't it, how kind of this whole digital thing has changes stuff. I just wondered if you had any top tips with regards, you mentioned or touched on facilitating focus groups in this way. Any top tips around, I suppose, differences and how to get the best out of people, or anything that you picked up that you could expand on and share?
So I think it varied hugely between the different focus groups. In the first one, everyone was really chatty, and the sort of after we'd sorted out the issue with the raised hand, the problem was very much keeping people on track, because people had lots they wanted to say, and it was going off in lots of different directions. So very similar to sort of face-to-face focus groups in terms of the sort of issues that might come up. In terms of how to facilitate it online, that might be a bit different to face-to-face. Probably the biggest issue is how to deal with things like people dropping out or maybe not showing up. Whereas if you were doing a face-to-face one, you probably have two people and you could have somebody sort of sorting any practical issues that come about while you're sort of carrying on with the focus group. If there's just you facilitating it and then somebody drops out, you've got to decide, are you going to wait for them to come back in? Are you going to try ring them? Are you going to just put things on pause for a few minutes and see if they rejoin? And I found that what was really useful was having a study mobile, so that if anybody dropped out or was having issues joining, they could ring me. And obviously, if that's something you have access to, great, but not everybody does have access to a sort of work mobile. But if it's possible to get access to one, it's really useful.
Thank you. That's good.
Anna, have you had any challenges with? I know when we've been doing kind of virtual consultations and stuff, it's sometimes hard because the non-verbal cues can be a little bit more difficult to find and a little bit more delayed. And have you had any challenges with that, or have you found any ways to overcome it, or is it just have people kind of got naturally more used to using technology over time?
So I think there weren't any major issues that came up in the research I was doing, but it probably does depend a little bit on your research area and how sort of sensitive a topic it is and things like that. I suppose one way to approach it would be to record visual as well as audio if you think there are going to be important sort of visual cues that you might miss during the group itself. My sort of decision for just recording audio was because I think some people are less comfortable sharing their screen if they know it's being recorded, and I felt if possible it was helpful to people to share the screen. It helped sort of with knowing when to speak and things like that. But then when I got to the point of sending the transcription company did actually ask if I had the audio, because they said it would be easier for them to transcribe. So there's pros and cons either way, I guess, with that. But I certainly didn't find the actual analysis was trickier because I've not seen those, maybe not seen all the non-verbal cues that I would have if it had been face-to-face.
Great. Thanks, Anna. That's really, it's really interesting just to hear all about it. And it's great that you've got that experience, and it's kind of reassuring to hear that it, even though technology feels like a really new thing, that actually it's working well and that you've had really great success with it. Any more questions for Anna, or shall we move on to our last speaker, Heather? Just give everyone a moment, but in case no one's unmuting themselves, but brilliant. So Heather is our final speaker of the session. So Heather is one of our research nurses here in the Children's Hospital. And Heather, I can't quite remember what's happening for you from an NIHR point of view. Perhaps you can just give us a bit of detail while I hopefully get your slides on the screen.
Hi everyone. I struggle to remember at times as well, Lynn. With everything that's happening at the moment, it's hard to keep up sometimes, isn't it? Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to talk about some of my experiences of conducting patient and public involvement online with children and young people. So I'm one of the senior research nurses in the children's research team. So in terms of the NIHR, I did the ClinRes, the Masters in Clinical Research. Absolutely love that. And then I got the Pre-Doc Bridging Award, and I also have an NIHR 70 award, which is a national award brought in to try and increase the research culture and improve the research culture, specifically amongst the nurses and midwives. So it's a great opportunity. So it's 2 days a week for 3 years that I've got funding for to try and get our nurses and midwives more involved. So that's me. So one of the things that I've been trying to do through 70 at 70, and it started a little bit before as well, alongside the opening of the Children's Clinical Research Facility, was trying to get some young people, children and young people, involved in advising us with our research projects. We're a massive tertiary centre. We've got a brand new CCRF, and we've got some fantastic patients and some healthy volunteers as well around the Leeds area and beyond. And it seemed a crying shame that our researchers in the Leeds area were going elsewhere to conduct PPI with children and young people. So I'm not an expert, but I am lucky enough to be joined up with a group who are much more of an expert than I am, who I've learned a lot from, who actually do PPI as a full-time job. They've got that luxury of having time and finances that I don't have at the moment, but I have learnt a lot from them. So if you just put the next slide up, please, Lynn. So yeah, I'm certainly not an expert, but I can tell you what we've done so far at Leeds and how we've linked in with people who are more qualified to talk about these things than I am. So yeah, so I'll talk a little bit about our experiences here at Leeds Children's Hospital and the group I've been talking about. I don't know whether you've heard of them, the Generation R Alliance. So Generation R was set up maybe 10, 12 years ago when I first started working as a research nurse over in Manchester, based in Alder Hey. And with working in Manchester, we were used to link in very heavily with the Liverpool group. So I was lucky enough to build some relationships with Jenny Preston, who's now regarded very highly in the young person's advisory group world, both nationally and internationally. And then my last slide has just got a few resources on that I just thought I would share with the group today. Thanks, Lynn. So I've only got a few slides, but here we are. So at Leeds Children's Hospital, we set up our YPAG back in October, so what's that, 11 months ago. We tried hard for a long time to build a partnership with the university, and that nearly took off. At our first meeting, we had nobody attend, so we knew that we needed to do something a bit different, really. So we were just gathering momentum, really, by the time that COVID came along. We'd had three or four face-to-face meetings by that time. We'd come up with our name, which is the Leeds Young Research Owls, hence the owl picture. So yeah, we were just gaining momentum, and then suddenly all of this happens. So as time went by and services started to resume a little bit, probably about May time, I conducted a session online, and some of the considerations were doing things like icebreakers with the young people. I got them to tell me about all the good things and the bad things that had happened with their lives through this pandemic, and it got them talking to each other and sharing their experiences and how they've coped. I think all apart from one were patients at the hospital. And this was at a time before sort of Zoom became less popular because of the security around using Zoom. So we used Zoom for our first meeting online. And we did the usual things like making sure people were muting the microphones when we started, and when they weren't speaking, and just being respectful to each other and putting in a few ground rules at the start. There have been mixed experiences with sending out pre-reading before undertaking our online meetings. Sometimes it's a bit difficult because some people have done the reading and some people haven't. So there's a mixed school of thought around that. I do wish that I had had some support by having a facilitator who could just help those people who were sort of texting and struggling to dial in. So you certainly learn from those things. And I think you may have spoken about this earlier, but it certainly increased accessibility for people who wouldn't normally be able to take part in the groups. So, for example, my daughter managed to take part. So we live about an hour and 20 from Leeds. So there was no way I could ever bring my daughter along to a tea time meeting at Leeds, having worked there all day. So it was great that she could take part in these meetings for the first time. So that was a real positive for me. And there were other people that were more forthcoming with taking part online. So apologies if any of this is repeating what's been said before. So these are just some of the things that I thought I'd share with where we're up to at Leeds. Laurie was one of our researchers, and I'm more than happy for you to chip in at this point, Laurie, if you want to say anything about the meeting that you attended online with our young people.
Hello. Well, just to say that just this is an amazing resource really to have within our hospital. My existing group had fallen away, and so I was so lucky during lockdown to have input from this pre-existing group. It was really crucial to my study moving forward, really, and they were so lovely, and yeah, their input was invaluable, really. They were able to comment on child-facing study documentation for me. So we shared the documents via email, and then we had an online PPI meeting via Zoom, and yeah, it was just so helpful, really. So they were able to comment on the design and language, accessibility of my study documentation. And following their input, I could make some really good changes. And in the meeting, it was really helpful to discuss practical points about conducting interviews with children, really, what they felt would be appropriate. So, for example, sort of running things by them, such as would it be appropriate to invite children to bring a photo or a picture that they've drawn, to the beginning of the interview to trigger discussion? What did they think about having like a yellow or a red card to sort of indicate pausing or stopping during the interview, or wanting to skip a question, that kind of thing. And things like whether it would be appropriate to ask children to choose a made-up name for themselves, things like that. So really, really invaluable, really. And they were cool as cucumbers, really just able just to say if they liked it or not, and why. But yeah, really, really helpful. So no, fantastic. I think it's a fantastic resource. So I don't know, I didn't know about it until just before that, so I'm not sure how widespread, how well known it is to have that resource. So that's potentially something there. But I guess if people attending the research forum are getting to hear about it, then that's fantastic. So yeah, it's great.
Oh, thank you, Laurie. Yes, yeah, we're well aware that we are on a mission to increase our visibility. And within the Children's Hospital, I don't know whether you know, we've got a new communications manager who's just started full time as well, who we're working with to try and get the website better and decrease the amount of links and clicks it takes to get to research that is taking part with children in the trust. So hopefully that will all link in together. And Generation R Alliance have offered to put some stuff online for us as well. And it's just the time, isn't it, just to do it all and get it all sorted amongst everything else. But we will get there. So just moving on to Generation R Alliance. So these are people, amazing people who do amazing things, been around a while, although some of them are newer groups like myself who have joined. So they're usually PPI leads within trusts. They're actually all around the UK. And also there are some members who join and come over to meet before COVID in person from Europe as well. And we usually meet 6 monthly, and obviously that's all gone online now, and they're a fantastic resource. So so these are just some of the tips that I've picked up from them. So I think you were talking about reimbursement. So one of the things they were been saying is that during COVID, they've been sending out links to click on Amazon vouchers. So instead of faffing around with hard copy vouchers or getting bank, details or anything like that, they've just gone for the Amazon vouchers at the moment that can simply be emailed out and clicked on and redeemed. They certainly advocate a facilitator to overcome some of the problems I was saying earlier. As time's gone on, it's become apparent that Zoom is perhaps not the best forum to use when talking to patients. So not all of them are patients, but I think going forwards we will definitely move on to Teams. Thinking about regular breaks as well. They advocated making sure that you factored in the time, even though you're online, and it's tempting to just plough on and carry on, especially if everyone's in a flow of giving you feedback. And it's important to make sure you make time for regular breaks and cutting meetings perhaps a bit shorter than you would in face-to-face. Some young people haven't liked having the video on. So I think, although I allowed the children and young people at Leeds Children's Hospital to not have their video, and I think it should be that you should make it clear that that's acceptable right from the start. And just to make sure that everyone knows that they can still contribute in that way. And also some of the other groups have emailed some of their thoughts in later and after the groups have taken part online as well, because they're just a bit too shy to kind of speak up at the time. And one of the groups has started a creative writing group sort of subgroup within the Young Persons Advisory Group as well. So they've written a few blogs and done a summary of each meeting that's taken place online, which I thought was a great idea. And it just looks, great for them on their CV. And getting them involved, really. And it's making sure they pay attention. So those were just some of the things that came back from Generation R Alliance. And also they've done things like Twitter takeovers as well, which I just think is fantastic for young people to get involved in. Next slide, Lynn, last slide. So these are just some of the resources that I thought I'd share with you. Some of them are just some of the blogs that children and young people have written. I just thought I'd share them there with you, and just my email address as well. I'm just conscious of time, and I want to thank you for letting me speak about this, and hope it's been useful in some way.
Thank you, Heather. It's been I find it really useful. So if you wanted to kind of get in touch with the Leeds Young Research Owls, how do we do that? Do we come through you? Is there kind of guidance about that on the intranet? Where do we go?
Through me at the moment, but it is being worked on.
Brilliant. And you happy for us to contact you about that? Brilliant.
Absolutely, yeah. We can have meetings where we have more education type meetings, which are great, but it's always fantastic to have more of our researchers using the group, accessing the group. Obviously, that's what we are ultimately there for, as well as giving back to the young people, giving them research skills, research awareness, and getting them involved.
Brilliant. Any more questions for Heather about all of the fab work she's doing from a PPI point of view? I think Angela's cleaned his waving.
Again.
Angela Virgin again.
It is, sorry. I'll definitely shut up after this. Heather, that's amazing. I had no idea that you were doing all that. My goodness.
Right.
Yeah, I've got loads of questions. How old are they, the kids in this group?
Yep, so that's so 8 to 18 essentially, but there have been inquiries from slightly older as well, but generally 8 to 18.
And it's that thing where I'm sort of so for the work I was doing, it was all around digital and medicines, and the patients and carers I recruited to my initial groups were all retired from professional backgrounds, and some of the feedback from them as a group was you need somebody that's a bit younger than us. And it's that thing of how do you recruit people of that generation, and I'm sitting here thinking, oh my word, this would just be ideal. So I might get in touch actually at some point. Would that be all right?
Absolutely fine.
Cool.
Yes. We have about 40 children on the email distribution list, but having said that, that hasn't transferred through to numbers. So we've had, I think the first meeting after the no-show, we had 3, and then we've had up to 9 at one meeting. So it's not huge amounts, but it's a start, and it's a start that I'm proud of. And I just want it to not lose momentum through all this.
It's really good, honestly. It's brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I don't know if Malenka might have had a question, because I can see that she unmuted herself.
I mean, this sounds
Hi,
amazing.
Malenka.
Hello, I'm definitely going to send you an email.
Oh,
one of
good.
my other questions is, so the research I'm currently focusing on, mainly due to COVID, because obviously trying to scan inpatients only, is the kind of neonatal cohort. So sort of addressing sort of pregnancy and early postnatal periods. Do we have any focus groups in that direction at all? Because I think that's another group that I find quite difficult to actually kind of find somewhere easily without creating one. I mean, we had all plans of doing a big research cafe where we invited loads of people as a sort of fun day where they could all come with kids and have entertainment and all that. But obviously COVID happened, so none of this is going to happen. So I've struggled a bit with the sort of online engagement in those sort of age groups.
So shall I bring Stephen in at this point?
Well, you can do, yeah. So I got involved with setting up my group for my doctoral research fellowship application. So perhaps me and Malenka could talk about that. But I essentially, I tried to then expand the group out, probably similar to the experience of Heather. It is difficult getting momentum going, and I do think it's a bit crazy, and perhaps as a forum, we need to think a bit more about how the Children's Hospital helps support us, because it takes a lot of time. But I do have like a list of parents who, so because my project was involving infants sort of under the age of 1, typical sort of the heart babies that we see, it was more parents that I needed to engage with about their sort of acceptability and their interest in prioritisation about projects about medicines in infants. So Malenka, I can help you with. I've certainly got a list of parents who are very keen to be involved, although I hadn't had the time or resource to progress it to sort of focus group wise, but they were all very keen to, and they've been brilliant. You know, I've been emailing a lot of them, and they've been getting back to me quite quickly, and some of them are keen to do virtual work. So perhaps we can maybe sort something out between us.
That would be awesome, yeah, because we could maybe, you know, try to use it for both of our research projects. That'd be great. Perfect.
Yeah, of course.
Brilliant. It's really useful to see, like, it's really positive and encouraging to see how, like, this group really helps to connect people, and you know, and it's so invaluable to work as a team with some of this stuff. That just, yeah, it's fantastic. And I think something like a PPI session is really kind of generated. I mean, it's something that we all have a bit of a common need across that group, so it's fantastic to be able to share it. I'm aware of the time. Have we got any final questions before we sign off for today? Thank you to our three fantastic speakers and to you all for joining our first virtual forum and coping with my terrible IT skills, but we survived.
Well done, Lynn.
Fingers crossed. Thank you. So fingers
Thank you,
crossed,
everyone.
we will be able to make this available for you, so you can access the links and the references easily afterwards, and that we can then also share it with people who've not been able to make it today. Keep a little eye out on the emails. We'll keep circulating things around. Please send any feedback through where, you know, this is attempt one. So please, you know, if you've got any comments, suggestions going forward, we are more than happy to have them. So yeah, I'll do my best to stop the recording, and then we'll bid you a fond farewell until next time.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.